Think in terms of ecosystem versus being on an island. Who are the ecosystem players? Who is a potential channel that we might service? Those are like the things that you can suss out as you go through the talking to the targets in the companies. Welcome back to the Inorganic podcast. My name's Christian Hassold. I'm your host, and this is episode 14. Today, we're going to talk about market mapping. No, wait, we're not going to talk about market mapping. We're going to talk about ecosystem mapping. Market mapping is the old way. Ecosystem mapping is the new way. Why ecosystem? When you think about a market map, you think about your company in reference to all of your competition and all of the point solution players around you. It's very sort of a two-way kind of a relationship in my view, and very narrow. And an ecosystem map, in my view, is way more powerful to be drawn out, because you should not only be thinking about where is your inorganic opportunity, but where is your indirect opportunity. Think about the great companies in SaaS, in software, enterprise software, Salesforce, Shopify, Meta, Google. For every dollar those companies bring in, at least $5 or more is generated by integrators, consultants, advisors, app developers. If you really want to build a truly like high scale, $1 billion plus company, you want to start thinking about ecosystem as soon as possible. And so I like to think about ecosystem mapping as a part of this exercise. Now, to be fair, you don't really want to start thinking about ecosystem until you're between, say, 25 and 50 million in revenue, because before 25 million, you've got a lot of other things to worry about. But let's just say you get there, I'd be thinking about ecosystem mapping. However, if you're pre-25 million and you're wondering about market map, don't worry, this episode is still very relevant for you. It will walk you through how I think about not just market mapping, but how you rank stack your M&A targets, how you kind of sort them and go through that fleshing out process to make sure that you've got the right target in mind, or the right sort of order in which you're going to approach your specific targets. So before I get into the details, I want to start with a problem statement. This is a real world situation that happens to practically every corporate development person. Like day one or week one on the job, you walk into a room with a CEO or someone in the company and they say, "Hey, I just got off the phone with this founder. He's ready to sell his company. We love them. We've been talking to them for weeks." Or another scenario is, "We just got a SIM from this banker for this company that we've been wanting to look at for a while. It's really exciting." And there's an intense amount of pressure on you as a corporate development leader to sort of run to and look at this target, because one, you're kind of the newer person in the building, and two, everyone's looking at you like, finally, someone's going to make this easy for us and help us solve all our problems. The hard part about the role is having to step back and think with the end in mind. And here's what the end in mind looks like. You walk into your executive room, you walk into a board meeting, and you say, "Hey, we want to go buy this company." And the first thing your investors say, "Well, why this company? Is this the only option? Are there other options? How do you know this company is better than the other companies?" The things that you have to do to develop like a really complete understanding of what are the right targets is you have to kind of build out your market map, build out your ecosystem, understand all of the players. And then when you're looking at a target, be able to, at a minimum, rank stack a particular target against all the other possible options through the lens that is the most relevant to your strategy. Now, from the top, there's a precondition that I won't go into detail here, but in order for you to be doing inorganic, you absolutely have to have a company strategy that's super clear about what you're going to do, what your customer focus is, what your product focus is, and be aligned on what potential kinds of inorganic you're going to do. We're going to assume that is done here today, because it would be a whole different episode to talk about corporate strategy and aligning it to M&A. Today, we're really going to assume that you have a corporate strategy and that you have a clear alignment for why you do inorganic. What we want to do now is make sure that if you're going to consider any kind of inorganic, that you're very holistic in the way that you look at all the possible options out there, and you go to every effort to learn about all the possible targets that may be relevant, whether it's a mandated search that's been given to you to go find this kind of company, or whether you've got a bunch of different inbounds. Dealing with a lot of inbounds and people coming to you is very reactive. You want to be proactive. And today we're really focusing on how to build a proactive strategy. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about the modern market map, or the ecosystem map. And for those of you listening, there are some slides that are accompanying this talk, which you can see on my YouTube channel at YouTube Inorganic Podcast, or I'll talk you through some of these pieces. It probably is most helpful if you're watching it, but if you're listening, no problem, I'll talk you through it. So what I'm showing here is what I call the ecosystem map. And the ecosystem map has the company that you're at in the center, and you are surrounded by 4 distinct parties. One is direct competition, and direct competition should be companies that really are the primary ones that you're battling with in the market in your everyday sales motions, and the ones that everyone's talking about in the hallways. Well, those guys got our deal. We took a deal from them. Those are your direct competitors. And you'll have some criteria to develop to come up with what a direct competitor is. You might also have indirect competition, and common indirect competition can be substitutes. That is, products that customers can use in place of your product or to get a piece of what you have, or point solution players that have like one feature or small amount of your feature capabilities, but happen to capture a certain segment of the market. Maybe they are SMB focused and you're enterprise focused, or vice versa. That might be a picture of indirect. And then there's kind of 2 sides of your partner channel. One is your channel partners, people that could potentially resell your product. This isn't always true, for the record. Like, you don't necessarily need to have a channel strategy. It may take time for channel strategy to be possible. It adds complexity, but you should be thinking in terms of whether it's now or in the future, what that channel is. That is a company that can resell or install your software for you. And then the other side is SI partners. And examples of SI partners might be an Accenture or a Deloitte, or some medium-sized firm. I think about in commerce, American Eagle. These are companies that can essentially support the implementation and the change management required to adopt your software. I didn't mention it earlier, but when I'm talking about channel, I'm talking about companies that primarily make their business of reselling other companies' software and maybe some services on the side. To be sure, Accenture and Deloitte and so on do a bit of that reselling, but I find that they tend to be better implementation partners in my experience. And bear in mind that I'm talking about, the SaaS ecosystem under 300 million. Accenture generally is not trying to focus on selling software that isn't at least $1 million a year, because it's not really worth the money to them, but they definitely want to be around the install base to do the implementation and change management. That's where that relationship comes in as an example. So this is just kind of the picture of that market map. And so the question is like, well, how do you build this market map? What are the ways that you as a corporate development leader can get a holistic view of all of the potential players in the ecosystem? You may be a subject matter expert, and you may have a lot of market knowledge, but you still need to battle test that knowledge. Or you may be the new guy in the room who's new to the entire industry. Sometimes it's better to be new to the industry because you really come in with sort of no bias and preconceived notions about what competition looks like, and you can really think outside the box. It takes a little longer, but it may be to the benefit of taking longer. There's pros and cons of having an SME or someone who's a straight walk-on, never been in the market before. The more important thing that you should know as a corporate development leader and as someone who's bringing in a corporate development leader is that they know where to go to get the information. Number one, my sources of information, the ones that I prefer, is first I talk to the executive team, of course, especially the CEO and the leaders. Like, who are you seeing in the market? Who keeps you up at night? The other constituent that I love to listen to is one of my favorite sort of sources of information is the sales team, the go-to-market team, those people who are facing customers. They know everybody in the market. They know exactly what's getting in their way in sales calls, net new sales, what's getting in their way of upsells and expansion. They'll have a long list. It can be very noisy, but they'll give you a really long list of potential players. And that's a whole parking lot of players that you can put into a pile and start rank stacking. And then, of course, the product team's going to have a lot of thoughts about players and usually a lot of opinions about who actually has the cool tech and who actually has the right to win. And maybe they'll have their own sort of ideas around like who are the players in the space to be really complementary to us? What kind of tech do we need to accelerate our roadmap? So product is a really good information source. And it tends to be that like what go-to-market sales thinks is really important and what product thinks there's a little overlap, but there's also a lot of differences in opinion, usually around, hey, like these guys are super, a sales team might say these guys are always in our sales calls. The product people will always say we can walk circles around their product. And the sales team will say, well, if they can walk circles around a product, why are they taking us out in half of the deal cycles? So you have to kind of sit in the middle of all of that and filter and make sense of a little bit of that, signal and noise. And one of the ways that I like to do that is I like to listen to customer calls. I'm obsessed with Chorus. I love listening to customer calls. I love listening to pitches. I love listening to our product team talk about their roadmap internally and talking about their sprints and seeing what they're doing to understand the features that we're building. I love listening to forecast calls and hearing what's getting in our way and what's helping accelerate our pipeline. And it's just sourcing a lot of different information signaling and stitching that together to come up with a really good sense of what is our market, the world around us, and what kind of potential M&A targets would make the most sense for the company. Usually, there are some pretty strong opinions about what the company should do, especially in the C-suite or maybe in product, in terms of the people who are your kind of primary constituents. But you as a corporate development leader, especially if you're a 1 or 2 person team inside of a company, you have to source all this information and actually form, in my view, kind of a thesis, your own thesis about what is the right way to look at the market map, who are the right potential players to go after in what order, and then battle test that with the executive team. So I talked about the information sources. Now what we've got to do is you've got to start building the list from all the information that you've gathered. I like to use, a lot of people use Monday. I've used other tools as well. I've used just plain Google Sheets. You basically start a list and you put in the company name, the estimated revenues, the number of employees. Sometimes the number of employees can be a proxy for revenues. I can talk a little bit about that later. And then you start attributing those companies. Are they a point solution? Are they a platform? What is their primary focus? Who do they primarily sell to? You just kind of gather all of the different data points in this Google Sheet and start building it out. And usually what I find is progress over perfection. Just fill out the details that you have and then start using information sources, whether they're online or within the company, to kind of start filling them in. One of the critical questions that you have to answer when you're building sort of this initial list is 2 things in my mind. Number one is categorization of those companies, like what buckets do they fall into? So for example, this is like, AI enabled, listening tools, like these are AI enabled document readers, or kind of like all these different segments of the AI automation ecosystem. You might have to categorize them. In my world, I live in commerce. You might say, okay, there's shopping carts, but then beyond shopping carts, there's checkout solutions. There's things within checkout like shipping and credit card processing and fraud monitoring. You just kind of have to categorize everything into a precise bucket and use that to sort of fit them into the boxes that you might vision on the market map when you get into the place where you're actually doing the market mapping. I like to do building a list first, then build a market map. The second thing is figuring out the revenues of the company. Most companies under, 100 million in revenue, it's pretty hard to get their revenues. So, what you can do is use number of employees as a rough proxy. It's not always perfect, but one sort of quick and dirty way that I can figure out what the revenues of a company are. If there's, if there are 10 people, you can sort of assume it's about 1 million. If it's 20 to 50, you can assume it's between 2 and 3 million. But where they're located in terms of their employee base tends to change their cost profile and therefore their revenue profile. This is really kind of rough and ready and terrible. So like it's my own kind of quick and dirty way of solving it. Let's say I'm looking at a company with 50 employees and I want to guess their revenues. Half of their employees are in the US and half of their employees are in like the Ukraine. What I do is I take the 25 employees in the US and I'll just figure that on average, their total loaded cost to the company is $200,000 a year. And therefore, my assumption is that the company's got to make at least that much money in order to pay those employees, or they're burning capital. So you kind of like take that one base in the US and then you assume, depending on rates in Ukraine, it's usually around 80,000 euros times the number of employees there. And you get a number which is around 3.5 to 4 million in employee costs. And now you can assume if it's a venture-backed company, maybe they're burning a little, but they're not going to be burning a lot. So maybe assume they're burning about $1 million a year. And then you can go ahead and assume that like if it's 4 million in costs, maybe they're making 3 and burning 1 million. It's a very rough cut way of doing it, but it saves you a lot of brain injury of trying to have to guess. And if you decide to actually start focusing on that company down the line and talking to them, you'll eventually get their revenues directly from the company. Just use employees as a proxy. Again, that's my quick and dirty way. You can have your own quick and dirty way. You can spend a lot of time on the web trying to figure out what revenues of companies are. There is no reliable source, especially for companies that are like on the smaller side. So quick and dirty is a lot easier. Employee headcount is a lot easier. So let's assume now that you have your list of companies, and now it's time to make the market map. So I want to do this for a moment and just kind of talk about a few different examples of market maps. What I have here up on the screen is an example market map for front-end checkout. That's half decent. And I want to just point out a few things about this market map. First of all, it's not a great ecosystem map. It's more a market map, if you will. And what you're seeing here is kind of the map is segmented out. Again, it's for front-end checkout. And this has segmented the market into front-end platforms, subscription APIs, meaning APIs that process subscriptions for, say you're selling a product that's a subscription-based product, you would use one of these API services. There's chat commerce for being able to communicate through customers through the channel. There's live stream. There's order management. There's payments and fraud protection. There's search and recommendation. There's cross-border payments. This is actually a pretty decent market map for commerce. You'll notice that there's no like ecosystem in there, but this is a very good example of how to just sort of generally start bucketing out your ecosystem. It should go as narrow as needed. And I would say that as narrow as you choose to categorize should go through a little bit of iteration with both your CEO and your product team. Those are my primary constituents for sort of classifying the targets. And, go refined, but not so refined that you have too many boxes. You'll notice that this market map, if you're looking at it on video, it's just very clean. It's very easy to understand. Okay, so I showed you what I'd say is a good example of a market map. Now let's take a look at a terrible market map. This market map just kind of here's what happens. If you haven't done market mapping before, then we're all just going to go to Google and start looking at example market maps. And I want to make sure I show an example of a terrible market map. This market map is, number one, incredibly noisy and doesn't really make any sense. So it's an SMB tech market map, and it covers a lot of different industries. There's the reason why these market maps exist on the internet, in case you haven't really double clicked on it, is there are companies out there that shall remain nameless that like to use market maps for clickbait as a way to say, hey, I'm going to put this company on a market map, and now their people are going to look at this market map and think of us for using our service or calling our analysts or subscribing to our platform. A lot of time these market maps are clickbaity and they create the seeming of a market map. It's not actually really a market map. Let's just look at a couple of examples of this market map that make no sense and reason why it's too noisy. Number one, I realize it's a horizontal and vertical look at these SMB players, but it's the titling of each one of the boxes is way too fuzzy. It's way too high level. Like HR, meaning HR what? Is it HR, is it like a platform for people management? Is it payroll? Like what is it? For example, there's JustWorks down there. Well, there's like 10 direct competitors to JustWorks, and like none of them are mentioned here, even beyond the ones that are in the box. And what is the relationship to those players versus accounting? And what's the relationship to those players with hospitality over on the left? Again, I realize it's an S&B tech market map, but what I want to point out about it is be careful about Googling example market maps for your industry and using the titling and the organization in the same way, because the risk you run is that they're either AI generated or they're just sort of for the purpose of clickbaiting, and you don't really communicate a great picture of your market map to your internal team. I wanted to give one other good example of a market map. Since I'm talking about market maps, there's a source link to this particular market map. This is for furniture tech. It's also commerce related. And one of the things that I like about it is it's super clean and super clear. It's highly unusual, actually, that the market maps created by CB Insights are super clean. In this particular case, they did a fantastic job of kind of bringing together like everything that has to do with direct to consumer furniture players, visualization tools, interior design solutions, and search and discovery for consumers, and then some of the actual players. It still is actually kind of fuzzy as a market map, but what I like about it is it's very clean, it's very well organized, it's easy for anybody to understand, including people who are not in the space. You can look at this, and pretty much every one of these logos, you will know at least what one of them are looking at it. And that's the kind of thing that you should have, is when you get a market map and you can take it out of your company and you can show it to your investors, you can show it to bankers that you might be wanting help in sourcing targets. Like if that ecosystem map has familiar names and makes sense to them, is organized in a clear way, it's going to help them help you as a part of your search process. So I think in another episode, I might actually go through the effort of actually building a market map for a particular ecosystem. I didn't have time for that here, but I hope these examples just are quick and dirty to like what good looks like and what not to do. So where I want to move to now is actually the rank stacking process. And that is the process of actually taking all of the names that you have and all the information you've gathered and melding it with the company strategy to start rank stacking the targets. You've got a list of 5 targets. They all do fundamentally the same thing. Now, which one is the ideal target for you to approach first? In what order? Which one will you prefer based on what criteria? Now, as a step back from this, what has to happen as a part of this process is you need to have an alignment between your leadership team, the leadership team that's involved in the M&A process, and your product team in terms of what are the priority qualities, primary criteria, and the secondary criteria of the target. I would say for this conversation, the key constituents in the company need to be the CEO, the CFO, the CRO, and the head of product or the CPTO, whatever structure of the company. Those are at least the 4 people who should have input into the design of the primary and the secondary criteria. And the thing that you want to always keep in mind is the very big picture of the company strategy and what are we servicing? What is M&A going to do in service of the company strategy? Generally, in SaaS companies, it's doing one of 4 things. It's either helping grow share of wallet with the existing customer base. It's expanding your TAM or your SAM to another customer base you don't already speak to today. It's expanding to new geographies. For enterprise SaaS, it's very typically expanding to Europe or vice versa, expanding to the States, expanding to Latin America as an example, or accelerating product roadmap. An accelerating product roadmap can be, we're going to add a net new SKU that is going to expand our TAM or our SAM, or we're going to add a net new SKU that is going to grow our share of wallet with our existing customers, or we're going to gain some technology that is some expertise that we have yet to be able to build, and we can save 4 quarters of engineering time if we acquire this company. So those are the kinds of examples of accelerating roadmap. Now you have to rank stack these players independent of sort of this, what is the service that it is doing to the company strategy? And I set up a few examples of primary and secondary criteria. Generally, the bucket of primary criteria is number 1, that the company target is going to complement the strategy. Very obvious. Number two is affordability. Affordability is one where you definitely have to have a conversation about what you can afford. And affordability is generally through the lens of the cash that you have available for M&A, the stock that you're willing to deploy as a tender for M&A if stock is going to be a part of the consideration, and then the total bucket of available and versus kind of what you're willing to pay in market. So for example, if you were a 25 million ARR SaaS company and your target is 5 million, you can guess that that target, if it's in good health, will go for anywhere between 5 times revenue and 7 or 8 times revenue, depending on its health. It has to be all about what it's worth to you, but there's also the market reality of what they're willing to take and what they're worth. So you have to kind of balance those things out. So looking at a $5 million company for a 25 million probably makes sense if you have the cash available, but it may not make sense if you may be looking at a 10 million ARR company and that's just way too big. And so part of the qualification is just moving things to the top of the list based on estimated affordability. And you can closely consult with investors. They'll usually be pretty helpful in helping you think through that piece. And then the other two that are really important is making sure that you're selling to a similar persona. It's one that's not going to require your go-to-market team to completely retool to sell, unless you're somehow going to be getting some know-how and subject matter expertise in accessing that new SAM or that new persona. So not a remarkably different sales motion, especially for companies under 100 million. Highly recommend not doing that. And then the second thing is just generally strategy alignment with the target. Now, this is something that you can't solve immediately because you're not going to know whether you're aligned on the strategy of the target from just looking at them on a map or on a website. You're going to actually have to have a conversation with the CEO. So this is criteria that's kind of a placeholder criteria that will take you time to get to. Even similar persona and sales motion, like you can get some information from your customer and from market and from sales, but you have to do some validation. You can get a reasonable guess as to where they'll fit there. There's also secondary criteria that you want to be considering as you're rank stacking. Some of this is, again, obvious but important nuances, is financial profile. Why is financial profile a secondary criteria? Well, it kind of depends on the synergies that will be created during the acquisition as to whether financial profile matters. For example, the company might be burning a lot of money, but you believe synergistically in putting the companies together over time, you might be able to realize some benefit and offset the burn, or maybe your company is profitable and they're slightly unprofitable. That match might work. Other examples of financial profile that you should pay close attention to is, are they actually recurring revenue? Believe it or not, there are a lot of companies that say they're recurring revenue, but they're actually not. They're tech-enabled services. They're valued differently, and they might actually drag down your growth rate or other metrics, including GDR, gross dollar retention, net dollar retention, et cetera. You want to make sure that the target's profile is not going to drag down your own metrics. And that's some work that you have to do during the diligence process to make sure that it's something that can be managed or it's something that can be ruled out really quickly if it's not a fit. The other piece is around integration and culture, both technical integration and cultural fitment. And so the thing you want to be thinking about in terms of technical integration is, can your engineering teams work together, or are they going to be kind of independent? If you're smaller, you really do want to be thinking about bringing teams together. And so technical integration is actually important, and having either similar tech stacks or coding stacks, like there should be some similarity because you eventually want to have some synergy and bring them together, both collaboration in terms of team, but also in innovation of technology. There are a few examples where this may not be the case. If you're accelerating roadmap and the team you're acquiring has a whole set of subject matter expertise that you may not have in the building, then there may be a reason to sort of keep that team not on an island, but operating somewhat independently to keep doing what they're doing. Those are cases that your CPTO and your head of product can make, but it's a consideration that as to whether a particular target makes sense. Just as cultural fitment. Cultural fitment is a big deal in cross-border deals, and you have to make sure it's more, that if you're a US company buying a European company, the cultures are going to be different. The question is can that cultural difference be mitigated or be resolved in the right way? For example, If you're buying a German company, are you going to have team and structure on the ground to support success of that company? That's part of the planning that goes into the integration process. If you say, hey, there's just no way we're going to operate in a particular country or we're going to be able to resource operating there, then it may not make sense to do an acquisition. However, if the company that you're acquiring has a lot of the infrastructure need, like HR, like payroll, like finance, and they have all that infrastructure there, it's already in place and it will work, then maybe the cultural integration is going to be a little bit lower. You have to be thinking about, do you have people on the team who can go into the theater and work side by side with those teams for 6 months to a year? That should be a part of this calculus. But generally, you just want to be thinking in terms of cultural fitment. Can you set that acquisition up for success if they're outside the geography in which you primarily operate? There's a lot of other custom things that come into the rank stacking, working with different teams over the years. There's nuances about the customer profile, specifically the exact ICP that they're calling on. What is the viability of the customer base, the TAM that you're expanding into? Like, do you believe it's a large growth market? Those things will be nuanced from one to the other. And generally speaking, those are sussed out as a part of the qualification process. And so once you have kind of the criteria framed, then you can start reaching out to the companies and doing those first calls and starting to do some discovery and validate the information that you've gathered about them. Bear in mind, you can be doing this kind of rank stacking and building simultaneous to the outreach. You just want to make sure that it's a group of targets as you definitely know you want to be engaging, so you're using time well. I always like to take the first call myself and do some pre-qualifying, and then the second call I do with a CEO. Sometimes I let the CEOs just talk to one another and have the call recorded on chorus if the target permits that, to just let the two founders kind of gel with one another. And usually between those two calls, what I get is pretty much a full profile of the company filled out, and it helps further refine this rank stack. And so now when we go back and think about the market map, what we're going to have is a really clear understanding of the targets and the players in each one of the sectors of the map. And especially for the area of focus that the company thinks is most relevant at the moment, the most immediate set of targets they think they should go after, you have a really strong sense of, one, which target you should be pursuing most aggressively and why, and which target may be harder to go get or just may be inaccessible for whatever reason. And now going back to where we started this episode, you can now confidently go before the leadership team, the company, and most importantly, the board, and say, here's the reason why this particular target makes the absolute most sense to us. And if that target doesn't come through or work out, then this target will be the next logical target, and here's why. Sometimes you get really lucky and two targets that are your top targets are available, or maybe target 1 and target 3 are available and they're accessible, and it makes sense to do both. You can do both. That's a possible outcome, of course. So you just want to be thinking holistically about what are all the possibilities. And again, as a corporate development leader, always maintaining a little bit of independent thought and having some opinion about what makes sense for the company. So we've talked a lot about market mapping, rank stacking players, and kind of how all those pieces go together. And that really, I think, is encapsulating of starting the market mapping process, the basics of the market mapping, actually going about building it out. I want to reference for you that there is a complimentary episode to mine on M&A Science, episode 161, which I'll reference in the comments. It's a conversation with Sabith Khan, who's the director of corporate development info blocks. This is about 2 years ago. What reason why these conversations are complimentary is he goes into a little detail about how he does his own sourcing. What's different between these two episodes is in his episode, he's got a very large team and a lot of resources and people that are helping service and support their corporate development effort. I'm really speaking to you, CEOs and corporate development leaders of smaller companies where there's really only 1 or 2 people to do the job. Therefore, there's more for you to take on. And in this case, a little bit more of independent opinion and sort of independent thinking that's required in order to run the process and do it well, because you're not going to have a lot of committee and a lot of other people contributing or providing different bits and pieces of information in the process. It's kind of all on you to take care of it. So in summary, think in terms of ecosystem versus being on an island. Today, I talked mostly about the targeting, but as you're doing the targeting, like extract from who are the ecosystem players, like who are the SIs, who is a potential channel that we might service. Those are like the things that you can suss out as you go through the talking to the targets and the companies is like, hey, do you have a channel? Do you have system integration partners? They usually do, and kind of add those and build those into the ecosystem as a part of the process. The next thing is to really get a strong read of the market and have an opinion, which I've said more than enough on the episode, and then test and iterate the market map. What I will just say is the first and the second iteration of the market map are never perfect. You kind of need to bring it to all your constituents, bring it to your CEO, bring it to your head of product, bring it to your investors. And if you're comfortable, if it's possible, take one of your closest banker or outside advisor relationships and have them kind of battle test it and see if it makes sense. And once it's ready, then you can ship it. And the last thing I'll say is, which I kind of mentioned at the top, is if you're like, yeah, this is great, I don't have time to build a market map, I've got a very specific target I need to work on, then that's okay. You know, in SaaS, it's all about speed and accuracy, a balance of speed and accuracy. And if you need to go faster, you can be a little less accurate. But the important thing not to pass over is that range stacking process and having confidence that if you're going after a particular target, you've at least considered the other 2 or 3 alternatives. So you don't risk the possibility that you didn't turn over a stone that might have been higher potential or revealed information that is an important consideration in your overall M&A strategy. So as we start to wind down this episode, just a few takeaways and a double click. When you're building your rank stack and you're actually engaging with your targets, make sure that some of your questioning actually speaks to who is recommending your product. Do you have someone implementing your product, or you're supporting your product outside of your company? Is there an SI or is there a consultancy that's helping get your product implemented and supported in the market? It's a question that's often overlooked, and it's a question about value realization. Often the ecosystem is a way to magnify the success and magnify the growth of your company. And most companies, as they get to that 25 to 30 million stage, there are people who start benefiting in the ecosystem off of it. You want to capture those and make sure that's a part of your consideration when you're rank stacking players. The other point is the ecosystem map, or the market map, if you will. You want to test and iterate it. So don't let the first version ship until you've reviewed it with your CEO, reviewed it with your head of product, had your investors look at it, let them really poke holes in it and make recommendations and suggestions on how to shift it. If you feel comfortable, and this isn't always possible, take that market map to your outside closest banker advisor or to one of your other advisors and have them kind of give a fresh outside look to it. A lot of times, if you make market maps internally, they can be, you really have that sort of internal lens, and you want to have kind of multiple perspectives on the market map for the sake of just really sussing out and thinking through what makes sense about the market map. The other thing that I like to do is highlight the parts of the market map where it's, you know, we have a right to win here, so we're not going to be acquisitive. This segment is a really strong partner candidate, and this segment is really where we want to invest from an M&A perspective. I actually color code them to make it super clear to the outside readers where we want to play. And by outside readers, I mean investors. I don't mean the market. That color coding may be internal only or for investors only. The external version will probably be more vanilla. Here's the ecosystem. We're not going to display our M&A strategy to the public. The last thing is, okay, great, all of this ecosystem mapping, all this work you just described, Christian. But at the end of the day, where you started this episode is someone brought me a target, or I have an inbound from a banker and I need to respond or react to that. The right thing to do, if you need to do speed over accuracy, is to at least go through a quick and dirty process of rank stacking the players that are similar to whomever you're considering, for the sake of making sure that if you're going to pursue a target that is a more reactive inbound or a opportunistic inbound that came through, you know, founder to founder, that you've gone through the process to at least rank stack the universe around that player. And you can say confidently to your board, to your executive team, and to the rest of the company that the reason why you pursued a particular target was based on a more holistic look of the players around. That step does sometimes get skipped. And after the fact, people say, well, was that the right decision? I'm not sure. You don't want to be in that place. So you as a corporate development leader are really the one who's thinking outside the box and taking the initiative to make sure you've covered all of your bases. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I just want you to know that the content that I shared on this episode will be available for a download at inorganicpodcast.co. If you enjoyed the content and the conversation, please do like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to our podcast. And until next time, take care.